Is the Director General, is Mr. Romano correct when he says that the new reporting requirements for the IAEA for Iran and its nuclear program are less stringent than the reporting requirements were prior to the nuclear deal?
I don't have any information on that one way or the other. And again, I would let Mr. Romano speak to. Okay, well then I'm in no position.
You're okay with the IAEA now putting out less information about Iran's nuclear program than it did before the nuclear agreement?
These reports, as you know, they're, as far as I know, it's, this one we're talking about, it's a private report to begin with. So I'm not going to speak to content.
The Director General for the IAEA says he's been under restrictions and limitations as to what he's allowed to report. That's why the reports have been this vague. But our State Department doesn't have a good answer as to why this is. Back with me now is Senior Vice President for Policy and Programs with the Center for Security Policy. He's a former CIA analyst, news commentator, and public speaker, Fred Fleitz. Fred, good to see you again.
Great to be here, Liz.
Fred, this is confusing to me, this whole situation. So maybe you can answer this for me. But why isn't the IAEA reporting on Iran's nuclear program anymore?
Well, it's been a mystery for the last couple of months why the IAEA Iran reports suddenly became very brief with few details. And Amano, Director General Amano, the head of the IAEA, he released this week that he's under instructions not to report on most of the things he used to report on, and he's giving very vague details on what he's allowed to report on. This is a secret side deal, Liz. This is something that the U.S. had to agree to with Iran, which has historically complained about these reports and wants them briefer and with few specifics. And, I mean, this is another secret side deal that the Obama administration agreed to and did not tell Congress about.
Well, where did he get these directions, though? Who gave him these limitations or these rules?
Well, I've been talking with people in Washington about that, and we think this comes from two places. First of all the resolutions in the Security Council and the IAEA were rescinded that gave Amano the mandate to conduct the comprehensive inspections that need to be conducted. But privately, I think he was told very clearly by the members, including by John Kerry, you're not going to report a lot of this stuff anymore. That's part of our nuclear deal.
So what are they going to report on instead? Just the compliance for Obama's nuclear deal?
Well, they are, but I mean, for example, Iran sent enriched uranium to Russia. The IAEA won't say how much was sent. Iran is developing advanced centrifuges. There's no reference to that at all in the report. Now, Iran shouldn't be doing that at all, but at a minimum, we should know what types of advanced centrifuges Iran is building so we'll know how much faster their nuclear program is progressing. The report doesn't mention it, and even liberal arms control experts are outraged over that.
Right. Why is this being omitted, though? Clearly, I know why Iran would want it to be omitted, because they don't want people to know that they're continuing with their nuclear program, that they're developing nuclear weapons. But why would America agree to that?
I think there was a secret side deal. We said to the Iranians, okay, we will agree to brief and vague reports that only touch on certain topics. Now, I will tell you that yesterday, Obama officials claimed that, well, we're going to ask the IAEA for tougher reports. And that's because I wrote a piece on it. There was a piece in the Washington Free Beacon. There was a piece in the Daily Beast over this. I think the administration is worried that this is going to become a campaign issue. But these tough reports aren't coming back because all these resolutions were rescinded.
Right. Finally, I'm glad that you are writing about this. Maybe the administration will take note, because when the people find out what the government's doing, we're not happy with that because it puts us in danger. Now, Fred, Iran threatened to walk away from the nuclear deal after they violated international agreements by conducting missile tests. What do you make of that?
Well, the missile test should be part of the nuclear deal because these missiles are part of Iran's nuclear program. They were kept out of the nuclear deal. Iran is violating Security Council resolutions, and it's going to regularly threaten to back out of the nuclear deal whenever we threaten to sanction it. We're going to basically wrap Iran on the wrists for these missile tests because we don't want to endanger the nuclear deal. What these tests are, they are Iran flexing its muscles to say we are the major power in the Middle East and the U.S. is going to do nothing to stop us.
But correct me if I'm wrong, these missile tests aren't against provisions in the actual nuclear deal as negotiated by the Obama administration. They're against other international agreements, correct?
Well, last July, the President and Secretary Kerry said the missile restrictions wasn't the deal. The fact is, the missile restrictions are in an annex to a Security Council resolution that approved the deal. The President and Secretary Kerry misled the American people. Iran never agreed to that. It is present in Security Council resolutions, and Iran has rejected those resolutions.
Well, call me naive here, but I don't quite understand, Fred, why America isn't walking away from this nuclear deal while we actually have a chance, while Iran wants to walk away as well. Why we don't just call it a day and say, hey, this was bad for us. We're not going to take part in it anymore because you're violating provisions.
Because this is a legacy achievement for President Obama. He came to office determined to get a nuclear deal with Iran and with North Korea, I might add, but we'll talk about that next week. And they're not going to let anything ruin this legacy deal, no matter how badly Iran behaves.
Right. Now, let's go back to these compliance reports from the IAEA for a second, because there are reports that are saying not only are these reports from the IAEA not covering the nuclear program as a whole, they're omitting data that has to do with the compliance of the nuclear deal too. And Fred, what data are they omitting for that?
Well, I mentioned the centrifuge issue. That's a big deal. It's also not mentioning possible efforts by Iran to acquire enriched uranium from other nations or raw uranium from other nations. But the most important thing is there's a long list of past weapons-related activities that Iran has engaged in. The file has been closed on all of those issues. So the IAEA will no longer pursue them. And this is important because some of these things are still going on.
Yeah, and talk to me a little bit more about the quantity that they did not disclose. Where did they send that to, and what's the purpose, even if they're not admitting it?
Well, I mean, for example, Iran has pursued things called nuclear triggers. We don't know where Iran was doing that or how far that process has gone, but that's important in making a nuclear weapon. There's a facility called Parchin where Iran did experiments on the development of nuclear warheads, explosive testing to develop a nuclear warhead. Iran didn't cooperate with the IAEA's investigation of that last fall. The IAEA reported this, but we voted unanimously at the IAEA in December to close the book on that. I think there's about 12 to 20 examples of very serious questions of weapons-related activities that the IAEA will no longer report on because the file was closed on these issues in December.
Now, what role does Congress play in this? Is this constitutional? You mentioned before a side deal, which sounds shady in and of itself, but was Congress aware of this side deal and they just had no control, or is this something that was bypassed our legislature?
No one was aware that the reporting requirements were going to be loosened. I mean, people suspected something was going on, but Amano admitted to it this week. And there's a number of members of Congress who need to be held accountable. They voted for this terrible deal. But the problem is when the American people go to the voting booths this November, they're not going to have the data on whether Iran cheated because the IAEA isn't going to tell them. I think there has to be hearings on this. And frankly, members of Congress have to find out exactly what is Iran doing. Is Iran complying with this terrible deal? And why isn't this being reported?
So it's a political ploy, in other words, so that Democrats right now won't be able to have accusations thrown at them because there won't be any data to actually use to substantiate the accusations. That is shady politics at its best. Fred, so what's going to happen here? It seems like this stuff's all coming to a head. We might not know information by November, but what do you see happening over the summer?
Well, I think Republicans are going to try to keep the heat up on the administration on this terrible deal. What we heard yesterday that the administration says they really do want tougher reports, they simply threw that up to deflect the criticism they're worried about getting. But I think Iran is going to behave badly over the next few months. It's going to try to flex its muscles while there's a weak president in the White House to try to establish itself as a regional hegemon. The next president is going to have quite a mess to clean up.
Right, and instead of the Obama administration taking leadership here, they're just trying to pass the buck, make it seem like it's out of their control. That's